Chapter 4. Harry woke up in the infirmary to an argument between the headmaster and the minister, just like last time. He had a minute to consider his response before anyone noticed that he'd woken up at least. Staying out of the issue was never going to happen, and denying Voldemort's return would come back to bite him later, not to mention get Dumbledore too suspicious. Voldemort. No, Tom had said that they needed to keep things as much the same as possible for the time being until they could plan, and him breaking with Dumbledore wouldn't be a good thing, no matter how much he wanted to strangle the old man with his beard. Harry realized that it didn't really matter what he did now, though. Fudge had heard him say that he didn't see anything. He could support Dumbledore and then look like nothing more than a loyal, foolish kid who believed the man who was like a grandfather to him. He resisted the urge to gag at that thought. It would secure the impression of his loyalty at least, and the fact that there were no eyewitnesses would just make Dumbledore look even worse, until Tom came out of hiding, which could work to their advantage. He couldn't help but wonder how much of that Tom had figured out already before he even brought up the idea. He had no sooner decided his plan of action before he was spotted, and the next 15 minutes were spent verifying that he hadn't seen anything relating to Voldemort other than the killing curse. But yes, he did believe Dumbledore, because he was Dumbledore and the smartest and best wizard in the world. He even managed to say it with a straight face. He knew that he was dooming himself to being made a fool of in the media again unless Tom stepped in there, or more likely had Malfoy step in for him. Either way, it would cement his place on Dumbledore's side until or unless they had another idea. He'd been through it before, and he could handle it again. It didn't take long for the hospital matron to come to his rescue as Pomfrey yelled at them both for disturbing her patient and kicked them out. By the next morning, though, she could find no more reason to hold him. The cut to his arm was easily healed, as were his few injuries from the maze. No sooner than he left, he was set on by Ron and Hermione wanting to know every detail. Neither of them were very happy that he didn't remember anything. They did trap him into saying that, yes, Voldemort had returned, though, even if he would only admit to believing it because Dumbledore said. Over the next few days, Harry found his patience tested in ways he hadn't been prepared for. He had essentially come to terms with the fact that Dumbledore had been playing him all along, but facing that fact about his two supposed best friends was far more difficult. He'd had the wool ripped off his eyes now, and that meant that he was noticing things he hadn't before. Like the way Ron played bodyguard to keep anyone else from approaching him, and the way Hermione badgered him to tell her every little thing he did and thought and felt, like he wasn't allowed any privacy at all. He found himself wondering if she reported on such things to Dumbledore, if she really was in the library when she said she was. Harry started pulling out the Marauder's map every time she left him and ran to go to the library, and sure enough, she always detoured to Dumbledore's office for about half an hour first. He'd had to hide the map from Ron, who was attempting to keep him occupied while Hermione was gone, but it was easy enough to watch under the table while they played chess. Did that mean that Ron was in on it too? He didn't know, but he wouldn't put it past him. He cried himself to sleep the first night he'd found that out. Was any of it ever real? He thought back over their friendship from the start and came to the conclusion that no, it wasn't. Their first meeting was suspicious enough. Mrs. Weasley walking through the station talking so loudly about muggles and calling the number of the secret platform, like she hadn't been there 100 times already. That was a statute of secrecy violation alone. She couldn't have been that stupid. That meant that him not knowing how to get on the platform had been planned so that he would see the Weasleys as his saviors, just like Dumbledore. Then Ron coming in saying that everywhere else was full. He'd been in school long enough by now to know that the Express could hold about 3 times as many students as were currently at Hogwarts. 2 wars didn't help the population much. Then the way that Ron immediately asked to see his scar. He'd clearly wanted to know the boy who lived. Not just Harry Hermione, he was sure really had just wanted to be his friend for innocent reasons. But her worship of authority meant that she would never deny the teachers or the headmaster any information they asked for. She wasn't socially aware enough to know that she'd been doing anything wrong. Just like she wasn't socially aware enough to understand how she alienated people. Harry put up with her for so long because he wasn't socially aware enough to understand that friendship shouldn't be like that until well after it had become habit. Now he wondered if he would have had more friends if he'd gotten away from the bigoted loudmouth and the insufferable know-it-all. Harry remembered that this summer marked the first one that they'd ignored him, on Dumbledore's orders, of course. They hadn't written and even kept Hedwig away from him. At least that would give him an excuse to make some changes next year. He just had to make it through these last few days of term before he went home. During one of the times that he took a walk to escape them, he ran across someone else who he'd been wanting to talk to. Seeing her walking around without her shoes, though, made him mad as he remembered the reason why. He was pretty sure they weren't friends yet this time around, but he did remember helping her last time too. "Harry Potter," Luna said in her dreamy voice as he walked over. "I'm glad to see that you've gotten rid of your Raxpurts, though the Chronomites seem to have taken over the infestation. They don't live very long, though, so you needn't worry." Okay, Harry said, narrowing his eyes at her and wondering how much she knew. He remembered how insightful she could be if you looked past the dreamy exterior and suddenly realized that maybe she was a seer. He knew that chrono had to do with time, so the Chronomites might be a reference to the time travel. Tom is free of the blibbering humdingers now too, so it should be safe to work with him, she said airily, as she continued looking behind portraits and tapestries. "I'll keep that in mind." "Thank you, Luna," Harry said, sure now that she was a seer of some sort, and the fact that she thought that working with Tom might not be a bad idea helped him to feel better about it. "Can I help you find your stuff?" "I would like that," she said with a smile. "I sense that we were good friends before, or will be." "Yeah, we were," Harry chuckled. "Let's look for a little longer, and we should still have time to make it to the Great Hall for pudding." "I do like pudding," Luna said in agreement. They walked and talked a little more, with Harry trying his best to remember everything she said to pick apart later. He couldn't keep up with her metaphors and codes in real time very well, but that didn't mean he couldn't figure it out with a little thought. As he laid in bed that night, he realized something that made him tempted to smack himself for forgetting. He wouldn't have any contact with anyone this summer. He wouldn't even have his owl. Unless Tom thought of asking his owl to wait for a reply, he would need some way to communicate. Harry waited until his roommates were asleep before he slipped out of the room and into the bathroom, and he called Darby. "The great Harry Potter, sir, calls Darby," the elf said excitedly as he appeared. "Yeah, I did," Harry said, hoping this wouldn't backfire on him. "Can I ask, are you bonded to the school or are you still free?" "Darby is still free, Master Harry Potter, sir." "Do you like working here free, or would you rather be bonded to me?" Harry asked. That would solve so many problems if Darby would bond with him. He wasn't going to force the matter, though. He knew now that elves without a bond withered away, but being in such a magic-heavy environment as the school would help to slow that down to almost a crawl. Taking him away from the school without a bond, that would be like a death sentence. "The great Harry Potter wants Darby for his elf?" Darby asked with wide eyes. Oh, Darby could only dream of being Master Harry Potter's own elf. "Okay, then. You can be my elf, but you're still to take time off, and I'll set aside an allowance for you. You're not allowed to punish yourself, and the most important rule is that no one can know that you're my elf. Is that okay?" "Oh yes, Master Harry Potter, sir." Darby nodded so hard Harry was surprised that his head didn't fall off. Darby snapped his fingers, and there was a brief glow around the two of them, and Darby immediately seemed so much healthier than he had a moment before. "Okay, great, and please, just Harry. Or Master Harry if you must. Now head on back and take care of whatever you need to before you leave. I'll call you when I get home and settled tomorrow evening." Darby disappeared, and Harry went back to bed. He knew that he wasn't likely to get a chance to nap on the express the next day. Chapter 5. Once Barty had left, Voldemort considered matters for a few minutes before he went to wake up Wormtail, who was currently being guarded by Nagini. When the rat started blubbering about wanting a new hand like he was promised, Tom took a minute to decide before giving him a new silver hand. He would just have to get rid of it later before he got him caught, along with obliviating him, but it would get him cooperation in the meantime. "You are to start cleaning up this place. Start with the bedrooms on this floor and get the bathrooms in working order as well. Then move on to the rest of the manor." Voldemort had just gotten the first layers of wards up when Barty returned 6 hours later, at almost 3 a.m. He waited until all the bags were set inside the manor before telling the man to go to the bottom of the hill and wait for him. He then cast the Fidelis charm, making himself the secret keeper, and then walked down the hill and told Barty the secret. With Wormtail not knowing the secret, he would be trapped in the building not knowing where he was, but he wouldn't be leaving anyway until he was taken to where he would be picked up. With the Fidelis up, he could rest easy for the night, and had Barty choose a room that Wormtail had already cleaned to rest in for the night, before calling Nagini with him to guard him in his own sleep. She wasn't quite as intelligent without the soul piece, but she was still smart enough for that. And still bound to him as his familiar, so she couldn't turn on him. A few flicks of his wand later to clean the master bedroom that he wouldn't allow either of his minions in, and he was ready for bed himself. It was nearly noon when he woke, and he had Wormtail back to work on the cleaning, but didn't trust the rat to cook breakfast lunch. He would need to see about securing an elf. For now, he would have to do it himself. He was almost finished eating, and had set some aside for his two servants when Barty came down. "Barty, your family has an elf, yes?" "We did, my lord, but my father freed her when I got away," Barty said apologetically. "She did like me, though, so unless she found another bond, she would probably be willing to rebond with me." "She will bond with me," Voldemort told him. "Call her Winky." Barty called, and she appeared a moment later, wearing a dirty dress and looking more than a little drunk. "Young Master Barty calls Winky from her disgrace." "Yes, Winky. I have a new master for you if you'll agree," Barty said gently. He was just as fond of the elf as she was of him. "Winky is a bad elf. No one wants Winky," she hiccuped. "If you will clean yourself up and sober up, you may bond with me," Tom said, curling his nose at her state. Winky was no fool. She knew who he was, and she was terrified, but she was even more terrified of remaining in disgrace and eventually dying without a bond. She snapped her shaky fingers and put a clean tea towel back on and sobered herself up. "Winky will be a good elf," she promised. "Then you may bond now," Tom nodded. When she snapped again and there was a glow between them, she stood straighter. "Now, you will communicate with no one without my express permission. You may answer a call from anyone bearing my mark should they wish to get a message to me, but you are not to speak to them. You may speak with Barty as long as he is residing here, but you will communicate nothing of what you learn outside of his presence. You will obey no orders but mine. Understood?" "Yes, master," Winky bowed her head. "Good. Now go find the other wizard in this house, tell him to come eat, and then remain in his room. Then you will clean up, starting in here in the kitchen and moving on to the rest of the manor." He knew that Wormtail would have done at best a passable job. Regardless, no wizard could clean quite as good as a house elf. Their magics were designed for it. "You will have dinner for 3 ready at 7 this evening." "Yes, master," Winky agreed, and then popped off to get to work. Voldemort had Barty follow him back to the entrance hall, where all the bags were still sitting from the night before. It had been too late to worry about them last night. "You will separate your things and go put them in your room, and then return and take the groceries into the kitchen for Winky to put away. The potion supplies will go in the basement, and you will start setting that up as a potion lab. Once that is finished, you may return to your room and put your own belongings away." "Yes, my lord," Barty bowed, and went to do as he was told. With everyone's jobs detailed, Tom went outside to do some more work on the wards. He already had the muggle repelling, anti-apparition, anti-portkey, anti-flu, fireproof, pest repellent, temperature control, and Fidelis up. Now he had to work on the more specialized wards, including one that prevented any elf not bound to him or otherwise keyed in from gaining entry. When he was finished, the only places more fortified would be Hogwarts and Gringotts. It would take him a few more days to get there, though, and only that little time because he had as much power as a full warding team himself. The next day, with all the crucial stuff done, Voldemort gave Barty the details for the next ritual he needed done and told him to begin the preparations for it in the potions lab. Prior to his temporary defeat, he'd had access to 2 forms, the one he was currently in and his normal human form. Surviving on Nagini's milk in his homunculus form had lost him the human one, though, and he wanted it back. Would need it back for his barely formed plans that he was still thinking through. The final ritual would give him something like a metamorph magus talent, but would only allow him to switch between his 2 forms at will. Unfortunately, there was no way to get the full talent. It would certainly come in handy. It took Barty 2 days to set up the ritual and brew the necessary potions, and by then, Voldemort had finished the warding. Before they did the ritual, though, he called Lucius first thing that morning. "Is everything prepared for the rat and getting Black freed?" "It is, my lord," Lucius nodded. It had cost him a lot more gold than he would have liked, but he knew better than to fail. "Excellent," Tom nodded. "Then I will arrange for Wormtail to be outside Gringotts at 1 p.m. You will ensure that there are auras there to arrest him. Here is the list of questions to be asked at his trial." "Yes, my lord," Lucius bowed as he was dismissed. Once he was gone, Voldemort went to the basement to complete the ritual. He didn't know how quickly the rat's trial would be, but he was determined to be present, and he couldn't exactly go like this. The next ritual would take another 2 days, so he would only be trapped in his human form for that long, and would have the ability to change by the time he met with the Death Eaters to get their reports. It ended up taking 2 days to get the rat his trial, and Voldemort had just finished the last ritual by then. He changed back and forth a few times to make sure that he could before going back to his human form and getting ready to attend the trial. He did need to put on a glamour, if only for the sake of Dumbledore, who would surely be there even though he was no longer on the Wisengamot. They'd wasted no time suspending him after his claims of Voldemort's return. He didn't need much, though. Given that the old man wouldn't think he could take this form again, all he would need to do is change his face slightly, enough so that he wouldn't be recognizable. Then even if he did get hit with a glamour cancelling charm, he could pass the old coot off as being crazy. After all, everyone knows what Lord Voldemort looks like. The trial went as planned, and all the right questions were asked. In addition to the proof that Sirius Black was framed and innocent, there were questions about why he had joined Voldemort in the first place that clearly stated his original goals before he'd gone mad. The goals that he would again be working for. It would get them in people's heads, and get them thinking about it, even if they wouldn't dare agree out loud. Chapter 6. When Harry got home, he was tempted to use magic to make his relatives more agreeable, but stopped himself in time. He had no idea if some aspect of the wards monitored for magic. At least, he knew that house elves could come and go undetected since Darby had done it before. He would have to find some way to find out about the wards before he got reckless. He wasn't surprised at all that his trunk and wand got locked in the cupboard under the stairs, though, but he wasn't worried about it. Once he was locked in his room for the night, he just called Darby. "Darby, all my stuff is locked in the cupboard under the stairs. I need you to bring me all my books, parchment, ink, wand, album, and cloak. Leave the trunk and everything else in there." It wouldn't do to have his relatives notice that it was missing after all. "Darby, do." The elf nodded and disappeared. He was back in a few minutes with the requested items, and Harry proceeded to start hiding most everything under his floorboards. Except the wand. That went under his mattress. "Thank you, Darby. I'll call you when I need you again." He wouldn't be doing his own chores this summer. No way. Except the outside stuff every so often so that the Order members watching the place would see him. Once everything was put away, he pulled out some parchment and ink and started making a list of things that he needed to find out, either from Tom or by himself. Do the wards register magic use? What all do the wards do? Study politics. What are Tom's real goals? Learn occlumency. What side is Snape really on? That was the end of his list for the moment. He was sure there would be more added to it, especially once he got a chance to talk with Tom about his goals, but it would do for now. The next morning, Harry was woken up by the sound of his locks clicking and his Aunt Petunia ordering him to make breakfast. "Yes, Aunt Petunia," he called out as he got up. He would have to talk to Darby later and see if there was any way that he could do the cooking without his relatives knowing about it. For now, though, Harry would have to deal. Once he got the huge breakfast on the table, he was given a piece of toast for himself along with a list of chores. "We'll be gone to London for the day, boy, and I expect all of this to be done by the time we get home," his uncle said. "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry said meekly. "Can we get the new PlayStation?" Dudley asked hopefully. "Of course, we can Didicums," Petunia said sweetly. Harry tried not to gag at them and got up to start washing the cooking dishes when he was finished with his toast, as was expected of him. He was almost finished with that when the rest of the family finished cleaning their plates and they were set aside to wash as well. As soon as they were out the door, Harry stepped back. "Darby," he called. Can you finish washing these dishes and then do the rest of this list except for the weeding?" "Yes, Master Harry," Darby nodded. "And is there any way for you to do the cooking and cleaning when my relatives are present and make them think it's me?" Harry asked. "Darby no can do that, Master Harry," Darby said, clearly trying to resist the urge to wring his ears. "Elf-seeing magic only works as on Mugglies, and Master Harry's auntie and cousin being squibs." "They're squibs," Harry said with wide eyes. He hadn't known that. "I thought squibs were only born from magical parents." "Weren't my mother's parents muggles?" "Oh noes, Master Harry. Squibs is being born with only little magics. Squibses has baby squibses who has baby squibses, and they think they's being mugglies," Darby explained. "Ha! I wonder if that's where muggle-borns come from," Harry considered before shaking his head. "Never mind. That's something to worry about later. If you want to get started on the inside chores, I should probably go get the weeding done so my guards can see me working." Harry took about an hour to weed the gardens and then just sat outside for a while enjoying the weather before heading inside. He stopped short at how clean everything was when he got in and shook his head. Darby did quick work. "Darby, can you get me some lunch? Not from the food here. Maybe pick something up somewhere." He knew that if he ate anything here it would be noticed missing. His aunt always took inventory before they left. 10 minutes later, Harry was sitting down to a nice meal. He wasn't expecting his relatives home until after dinner, so he had the rest of the day free. Once he was done eating and Darby cleaned up the mess, Harry went up to his room to get started on his summer homework. He might as well get that out of the way before he was distracted with other things. He did ask Darby to get him the Daily Prophet every morning and just leave it on his bed when he went downstairs. Over the next couple days, they got a decent routine going. Harry would wake up and make breakfast, cleaning as slowly as he could to drag it out. Once Vernon left for work and Dudley went to go hang out with his gang, Aunt Petunia would go sit with her magazines after giving Harry his chore list. She never came back in the kitchen after, so once everyone else was gone, Harry called Darby to finish the dishes and clean the kitchen while Harry scrounged himself some food. He kept track of everything he ate for Darby to replace later before it was noticed. Aunt Petunia rarely ate lunch, so unless Dudley was home, there wasn't any made. Aunt Petunia never bothered with him and never noticed Darby invisibly doing his chores, as long as he wasn't working in whatever room Aunt Petunia happened to be in. Darby was also able to do dinner, and Harry just had to be on hand to be putting it on the table when the others got home to eat. Other than meals, Harry spent most of his time in his room going back and forth between his summer homework and reading up on other spells in his books. He had realized far too late that they only learned a small number of the spells in class, and he had missed out on a lot of useful ones in between. He didn't dare practice the spells yet, but he studied the theory and made notes of the ones that he wanted to learn when he knew it was safe, including the books and page numbers. He had been home for 4 days before the paper reported that Peter Pettigrew had been caught by Aurors on patrol and was found guilty, and Sirius was declared innocent and ordered to present himself to St. Mungo's for a checkup. He wished that he had Hedwig so that he could write and congratulate him. He had Darby, but he knew better than to let anyone in the Order know that, even Sirius. Darby was for his more illicit communications, like the letters he'd been exchanging with Luna and would likely soon be exchanging with Tom. It was only a few hours after he'd received the prophet that Darby came into the room while Harry was neck-deep in his charms assignment. "Master Harry, sir, another Elves's comes and brings letter. Darby's make sure no bad magic's on letter." "Thank you, Darby," Harry said gratefully as he took it. He assumed it was from Tom since no one else he knew had elves, except the Longbottoms, but he doubted Neville would get in touch with him that way. He wondered why Tom didn't just send an owl, but decided it was probably a good thing he hadn't what with the guards outside that might wonder at a strange owl. It wasn't until Harry read the letter that he realized the problem. It started normally and relatively polite, including Tom asking where he was so they could meet up and pointing out that he'd lived up to his end of the bargain regarding his godfather. Then there was a postscript berating him for not mentioning that he had owl wards up and not keying him into them, so he had to use an elf to deliver it. Harry wrote back that he didn't know anything about owl wards and didn't even know they were possible, and that his owl was in the keeping of his friends for security purposes, so he couldn't send her to pick up his letters either. He also told him that there were both wards and guards at his house, so he would have to sneak out to meet anyway and try to dodge his guards, and that elf-delivered letters was a better option. Once he'd finished the letter, he asked Darby to take it to the Dark Lord, or more likely the Dark Lord's elf, since that seemed to be the way of things. He had just gotten back up to his room after dinner when he was delivered another letter. Tom told him that communicating through letters left a lot to be desired, and there was too much that he didn't dare put into writing. He demanded Harry's address and advised that he would check out the wards himself and that he wouldn't be seen by any guards because he was more careful than that. Harry immediately sent a letter back agreeing to give him the address, but only if he gave a vow not to harm his relatives or his guards. The next morning, he had another letter, and the Dark Lord's irritation just oozed off the page. It did include a written vow to not harm anyone unless in self-defense, and not to kill even then unless it was unavoidable. He told Harry that was the best he would get and to cease stalling. Harry huffed, but wrote down his address and sent it off to the Dark Lord.